Joseph Biden visits Kyiv yesterday and today, Warsaw. What's going on? Good afternoon. It is the usual time to wrap up some hard things into easy terms with Henry Keane on UATV channel for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Biden's Kyiv stop was a surprise, one for you, dear world. But the White House had also announced the two-day Poland visit earlier this month, and it is happening right now as I'm about to explain why. Because Poland is seeking a greater U.S. troop presence on its territory.
We are in the process of discussion with President Biden's administration about making troops' presence more permanent and increasing them. Mateusz Morawiecki, Prime Minister of Poland.
Well, if there was ever a point when Biden and his aides hoped to avoid personalizing the Russian criminal warfare in general, it was over long before this week's grim anniversary. At this point, Biden has declared Putin a war criminal and a pure thug, accusing Russia of genocide in Ukraine and, while in Kyiv, making an implicit call for regime change. Russia reacts with all its might. A Telegram account managed by the Russian army, Zapiski Michmana Pichkina, has noted the obvious somehow. Almost a year after the beginning of the special military operation, we are waiting in the Russian city of Kyiv for the President of the Russian Federation, but not for the President of the United States, it said. One way or another, this does not change our goals. It says also it's not the first time for Russia and Russians to win in spite of everything in general. Well, that very much includes common sense in particular, I'm afraid, because it is Putin who brought Zelensky to Congress and Biden to Kyiv. It is Putin who, in controversy to any imaginable logic, just keeps bringing us tanks, fighter jets, worldwide glory, hundreds of billions of dollars, while he's clinging to power at all costs until death does these two apart. And mark my words, it will be Putin who will bring us to the inevitable victory over himself and our future thrive and prosperity for generations to come. And if you ever wanted to know why, go ask Roman Emperor Diocletian or Joseph Biden. These two both have the answer. But first things first, let me explain you the hardest thing ever in the easiest way possible. Freedom isn't a virtue. It's a habit. Hard one. Very. Even a free man could have become a slave. But what a free man would have been dreaming of when enslaved? Of freedom. And the slave, what he's dreaming of? To become a master. You see, being a slave means no chains or prison cell or anything alike. It is when you just do not break out of this vile paradigm of master and slave, you just switch the roles in this game. Meet Emperor Diocletian, the only one, as far as I know, to step off his throne deliberately. And when people begged Diocletian to return to the throne, Diocletian replied, "If you could see the cabbage that I've grown with my own hands, you definitely wouldn't dare suggest that I replace the peace and happiness of this place with the storms of a never-satisfied greed for power." Told you. Diocletian knew it. The master is just a slave on the top of the heap. And freedom is the habit that you gain when you leave the heap. You are out of the game. No more masters, slaves, just society, democracy. You raise in your very self the habit that is as close to the ideal of freedom as it's possible for a human being. So it is all just won't turn to utopia. And that normal humanized freedom is a habit here in Ukraine, you see? A social habit, a mentality. Same as it is the civilized West. While freedom in Russia is considered a disease, a morbid illness, a deadly Western infection that is about to ruin their Russian way of existence. Yes, existence, not life. Because without freedom there is no life and everything ends up with destruction, war and dictatorship. And just like Emperor Diocletian, the 46th President of the United States of America, Joseph Biden, knows it perfectly well from his country's founding fathers. And that famous American system of checks and balances is aimed not to make life in America ideal and democracy absolute. That is a utopia. But so the system to check and balance that never-ending political brawl between Republicans and Democrats in the Congress that it instigates has been created by founding fathers to do just one thing: to avoid dictatorship. So that is why Biden was in Kyiv and in Warsaw today. It is a sign that America remembers its founding fathers' testament quite well. And we, the people, are not just words that could be rewritten and adapted to his dictatorial needs by any dictator like Putin did in Russia to their constitution, but a real manifest destiny of the nation that is determined to avoid dictatorship at all cost. And the cost of investment, and this is nothing but an investment in freedom, some dollars in fighter jets for the country that is at the top of the spear of to be or not to be choice and is fighting for freedom and against dictatorship just as founding fathers wanted, is just not too big. And for those of you who sit on your comfortable sofas in America and watch our war for your freedom while counting your tax dollars being sent here to Ukraine and not to your new porn subscription or gamepad or something similarly worthy, I have some math to do. Take all the money the United States has given to Ukraine yet, double it, or you know what, triple it. Then take the amount of all the tax money the US generates annually and divide it by the number of the American nation. You won't get more than $50 a month max. So those of you who want this money back, same advice, ask your president or Emperor Diocletian. Or you know what? Just read O. Henry. You'll find everything you need there to learn the difference between cabbages and kings. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation accused Ukraine of intention to carry out radiation contamination of its own territory and to blame Moscow itself in it on the eve of the extraordinary session of the UN General Assembly on February 22. There is nothing new in Moscow's accusations. Russian propaganda periodically updates the dirty bomb narrative. The last time it happened was October last year. Accusations against Ukraine of intending to infect themselves are made in absolutely Russian way. That reads absurd, and all suspicions can be averted easily. Kyiv's full compliance with the radiation safety regime is constantly monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And wasn't it Russian aggression that created the radiation threat first during the invasion of the Chernobyl and now during the occupation and irresponsible technical manipulations at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? Russia has conveniently forgotten it, of course, but as a nuclear power, it has undertaken obligations in the Budapest Memorandum and bears full responsibility for any incidents that may result in radioactive contamination of Ukraine. So the new wave of disinformation from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation is nothing but the very ordinary and, as usual, quite badly veiled nuclear blackmail of Ukraine and you, dear world, in connection with the obvious, yes, the visit of US President Joe Biden to Ukraine and the anniversary of Russian criminal war against us. I mean, this is hilarious, awfully hilarious. Just think about it for a moment. Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, is waging a criminal war against Ukraine, telling its people that it is at war with NATO. At the same very time, the Russian Federation is blackmailing the whole world with the fact that it can use nuclear weapons to protect its interests while exposing the world and Ukraine to the risk of a nuclear disaster due to the capture of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ever since Russia invaded our homeland last February, there has been a near-constant debate about Putin's nuclear arsenal and what he might do with it. The United States has repeatedly warned that frustrated Russian Tsar may actually be willing to use nuclear weapons, and the Kremlin itself has regularly raised the specter of a nuclear strike. Senior Russian military leaders have discussed when and under what circumstances they might employ nuclear weapons. The concerns haven't even prompted states close to Russia, notably China, to warn Moscow against going nuclear. And today, just hours ago, Russia suspended participation in the Strategic Offensive Reduction Treaty, SORT. This was stated by the a bit delusional head of the Kremlin, addressing the Federal Assembly.
В этой связи вынужден
I have to announce today that Russia is suspending its participation in the Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty.
Повторю, не выходит из договора.
I repeat, it does not withdraw from the agreement, namely, it suspends its participation.
Putin also urged all of us to be ready for Russian nuclear tests. And also he urged this decision by the fact that the United States and NATO provide support to Ukraine and also declare their desire to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. But, Comrade Putin, what option do we have?
And we, the victims of aggression as martyrs, will go to heaven, while they will just die, because they will not even have time to repent.
It is obvious to anyone who is not Russian, it is our Ukrainian and the collective West remarkable military successes, that Putin's upcoming inevitable historic defeat that triggers outdated Russian Tsar's rage. You know what, Russians? Why don't you go to the heavens alone? Just take your Putin, his bunkers, his trillions of dollars, not rubles somehow, from our banks, your outdated imperial ambitions, and good fucking bye. Just give us back those thousands of Ukrainian children that you have taken from us, from our land, to Russia, and then go nuke yourself. Some things are just too hard to be explained in easy terms. But I will try. Is Russian Federation a federation after all? And if not, then what is it? Regionalism is the theory of practice of regional rather than central systems of administration or economic, cultural or political affiliation. So is regionalism more important than ethno-nationalism in terms of the future of the Russian Soviet Empire's demise? Paul Goebel devoted more than 50 years of his professional activity to studying and helping non-Russian peoples who had the misfortune to fall under the rule of Moscow. Paul Goebel is an expert on regional, ethnic and religious issues in Eurasia, editor of 8 books and author of more than 1,000 publications in American and European publications. I'm sure that anyone who invites him to speak on the theme of already becoming obvious fault lines of the Russian Federation will expect him to focus exclusively on the issue. Moreover, the Soviet Union collapsed 3 decades ago, precisely along ethnic lines, and therefore it is widely believed that the coming collapse of the Russian Federation will follow the same path. There is no doubt that the ethnic factor will play a significant role this time as well, says the author, but it is unlikely to be the most important, and should not be the focus for those who are trying to understand what the collapse of the Russian Federation could really be. Those who do not want to admit this will inevitably become like the generals preparing for the war that has already passed. Let me quote Professor Goebel from now on, and because I believe these works are just the keys to the castle in the terms of the question of Russian Federation inevitable collapse. Some of the non-Russian peoples will undoubtedly seek independence, either within existing borders or with the return of lands lost due to Stalin's geographical engineering. Others will prefer a broader coalition or even settle for autonomy within a revamped federation. But still, speaking of the national republics, we must remember that their entire population is less than 20% of the total Russians one. And the real drama will unfold in the regions and territories that make up the predominantly Russian-speaking part of the Russian Federation, where the real force of transformation will be regionalism, not ethnic nationalism. The events of 1991 are illustrative in this regard if viewed in more detail, and not only from the point of view of the withdrawal of the non-Russian Soviet Union republics and the occupied Baltic states. Many people are only now beginning to understand that these events concern the most diverse regions and not just countries. In the Russian Federation itself, Russian regional projects were unfolding, such as Siberian Agreement, the Republic of Urals, and so on. It is significant that the Russian government was very worried about this project and sought to eliminate them in the name of territorial integrity, although in doing so, it destroyed any chance of turning the country into a real federation. Moscow's concerns reflected the fact that, then as now, Russian national identity is weaker than that of any other major nationality in the country and more prone to decay. The Kremlin and its supporters, however, will never be able to truly admit this, because in doing so they will pave the way for the two things they fear the most. On the one hand, they would then have to admit the possibility of the emergence of various Russian identities, many of which, such as Siberian, Novgorodian or Königsberg St. Petersburg, could turn out to be stronger than all Russian one. On the other hand, the recognition of this diversity would logically lead to decentralization and genuine federalism, but the Kremlin does not dare to do this, despite the fact that in the Russian constitution the country is called a federation, which is really not. And so today, just as 3 decades ago, Russia is facing a situation where the original communities that make up the Russian nation, considered homogeneous across 11 time zones, are becoming increasingly assertive in protecting their rights and interests, while the Kremlin insists on centralism and unification. Now, this creates a new type of crisis and opens the way to a revolutionary situation. In this situation, the center cannot hope to retain all its powers that it now has, keeping up with surrounding world even more. The Russian regions thus become a revolutionary force and potentially almost more than a nationalism of non-Russian nations. If Moscow were smart, the overdue regionalization of Russia could take place without any change in state borders. But since Moscow behaves inadequately, Russia is likely to face more radical and deeper events than even in 1991. Putin himself is bringing the situation to the point where regionalism will play the role of nationalism in the next Russian revolution. Of course, one cannot ignore the interest of various nations inhabiting the current Russian Federation and striving for liberation. But on the other hand, one should not make a mistake believing that it is the ethno-national factor that will become decisive in the next collapse of the colossus with feet of clay, Putin's Russia. It was me, Henry Keane, and UATV channel wrapping up hard things to easy terms for you, dear world, directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tuned for more.